this is time travel, right? This is
Mhm.
this is the flat circle of Pancakia that we were warned about by Worf.
Yeah, no killing our own grandfathers while we're doing this.
So we are attempting to do exactly what every sci-fi trope now warns against, which is we are going back in time to amend our lack of amendment.
Right. Right. This is an experiment of sorts in time travel and in continuing different methods of resurrecting the quote lost episodes from the RFG crypts. This episode's first half, original first half, which we recorded in 2018, was indeed lost, naming no owls in blame. So we're attempting to re-record the best part and stitch it to the older second half that we do have.
I feel like it's worthy of mention that it was our first time recording via any like electronic meeting program. And it was, and I don't think it's not Skype's fault. I don't mean to denigrate Skype at all. But Skype does feel a little bit like AOL at this point, after the pandemic. However, it recorded Al's voice on one track and my voice on another. And then Mark was able to stitch together what he could, but that's when we found out that we were missing, indeed the majority of the episode. So perhaps in a supra Valentinian way, we are a body looking for a head, or perhaps a soul looking for its mate, or, as I told Al previous to this, that I kind of feel like a parent who's lost their child in the mall, but also the child that is lost in the mall at the same time. So welcome to time travel and things that you should never do.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us. This episode is brought to you by discussion of Saint Valentine and his day, by the demon Brulafer and Eshupemba, the herb Heart's Ease, the mineral diamond, and the form of magic or magics called love magic. And if we can squeeze them in, maybe a little dancing with the major arcana of the devil as well.
Which is to say that the other parts of the episode as listed, Amicio and the corresponding Odu Oshe and Kirke or Circe as our dead magicianess, are indeed lovingly and in-depthly recorded. These are not adverbs that should be repeated. So yes, we are. There is a code word I will try, a code phrase that I will try and end on so that the recording makes sense. I don't know how we're going to get there, but that will indeed be either Al telling me he does have to go make dinner now, and I will, heartwarmingly say the code word of the day, which is not the elephant flies at midnight, sadly. Okay, so diving into our saint, because one of the things that I found this specific year that this would be recorded, and if you're listening to this for the first time stitched with the episode, and it's almost as if we recorded it then, is that St. Valentine's Day was Ash Wednesday in 2018. And there is a kind of an interesting parallel where the juxtaposition of those 2 days for me made a lovely dissonance that I like to dwell in. And this idea of beginning the great desert, the foray into the metaphorical desert of the time before Easter, and the resurrection, but paralleling that to the idea of love and what it is to, on many levels, without irony, love God, love yourself, love your community, love another, and what those different formations of love are. And I found it interesting that I think in these early days, we didn't try necessarily to line up all the topics so that they made sense to each other. But I do find it interesting that we didn't do the lovers here. We did the devil. And so, invoking the devil in Lent is there in that lovely way of like, bow down to me and I'll give you what you want, which is also a big lead into love magic in that way. But Valentine is such a notorious saint now that, as far as a 3rd century Roman saint, its association with Lupercalia has been popularized in modern internet memetics. That the very obsession word that's like, if Al is Al dead magicians Cummins, then I'm Jesse Value Centers Hathaway Diaz. but there's something that is here, going from the land being laden with wolves and trying to see your way through it. But that Valentine himself is a patron of many things, of young lovers, of asthma and beekeepers, which I do think those two things are wonderfully related. But he was either a priest or a bishop and ministered to persecuted Christians. He was buried on February 14th, which is observed as his feast day, which is interesting because usually we honor the death day, sometimes the moving of the bones as kind of like a third or fourth option. But in this case, it was actually his burial day because we had a date. And there's lots of conflation here because there's Saint Valentine of Rome and there's Saint Valentine of Terni. And and if we are together, our powers combined might be radio hagiographic blur free Golgotha. That there is something here. It's almost like I'm giving Easter eggs for people that, if they're listening to us in order from the beginning. These are terms that we say a lot. I'm very sorry. Sorry, not sorry. But that there are many stories, many attestations, many relics of Saint Valentine, especially when he gains popularity as a saint of young lovers.
I ended up going down a little rabbit hole in terms of looking at the further popularization of it as not just just the saint day, holy day, but as a wide holiday as well, and specifically laying that as some various English professors seem to do at the feet of Geoffrey Chaucer. And so I ended up looking at a fair amount of how February 14th starts to be further associated with romantic love, courtly love, and its expression, not just in terms of the actions of the saint themselves, but how the day comes to mean various things as well. But we can absolutely start with more specific hagiography in terms of there are like 9 Valentines, right? Like,
yes,
there's a bunch of the other ones,
and or more, and they all, because it is such an early church saint, like many of those things gets conflated with everything. And it's kind of wonderful for a study of a popularized saint day that we know has very little or nothing to do with the saint, but is still called under that title, even in the secular world, even by a largely Protestant community that let's say in the United States, who is celebrating it, but really doesn't like saints. It's still Valentine's Day. Even if it's not Saint Valentine's Day, it's Valentine's Day. And I find the name itself, right? The power of the name there is quite interesting. Yeah, there are many of them. There's, I think, over 50 different detailed accounts of the life. He is a golden legend saint, which is 13th century. And is, as we've discussed, one of the most well perused books of the Middle Ages. I don't know if it was read cover to cover, but like it was read. It was read aloud at church on those days.
So
yeah, it was considered like a reading to do at home. You could, that these sensationalized accounts of the saints' lives were actually felt to be suitable material for the Christian, for the good Christian of the 13th century and later. So the basic one from the Golden Legend was that, he was executed for refusing to deny Christ by Emperor Claudius. Before his head was cut off, he restored the sight and hearing to the daughter of his jailer. So there's this idea that as a miracle saint, he's even taking pity upon those. There is the author of the Golden Legend also mentions that Valentine does have a play of words of being full of valor. The idea too also that before his execution, Valentine wrote a note to the daughter of Asterius, the star, right? That's how I have to remember my mnemonic things going on here. Signed from your Valentine, which is the notoriety of inspiring today's romantic ideas about Valentine himself. But that he's a priest or bishop and he's in central Italy and he gets under house arrest, and Valentine was discussing, Jesus, as saints often do, and the judge put Valentine to the test and and brought him the blind daughter. And so that it was a forced test of like, restore the girl's sight and I'll do whatever you want. And which contains in our kind of Lenten parallel a little bit of that kind of devil deal, right? If you do this thing, I'll give you the world. But Valentine prays and lays his hands on her, and her sight's restored. And the judge, is enamored with him immediately. And that he asks that the home shrine in the house be vacated, that all of the idols should be broken, and that the judge should basically become a Christian right then and there, like go through baptism, fast for 3 days. And the judge does so, and contrary to the law, but he takes it upon himself to absolve all Christian prisoners under his jurisdiction, under his purview of their guilt, and lets them go. And Valentine's let go, and the judge is a rather large family, like 50 some people, and so they're all baptized, and it causes a scandal. And the emperor is kind of cool with Valentine because he can perform miracles, but then as soon as Valentine tries to convince Claudius to convert, Valentine is told to back the fuck off, and is beaten with clubs. Sometimes lions come after him, and he's executed outside the gate unceremoniously on supposedly February 14th. But we know that he was buried the 14th for sure. And in true early saint lore, to die a martyr is the saint's death, right? There's no word for saints. It's just you're martyred. You're either martyred and you're a virgin, or you're martyred for the faith in general. All the saints were martyrs. To the point where, I think we've talked about that too, where people like to tell the Saint Christians, I don't want to kill you because I know what happens.
You'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
It's the Jedi moments. There's a lot of other legends from him, and also the miracles that he performs after death, but that there's performing Christian weddings and all those things just associated with large households, baptizing, bringing families back together, healing family members.
There's interesting parallels there with, I guess it's a standard practice anyway, but I think of the first martyr of St. Stephen also being stoned to death outside the city walls, and that many towns built or expanding significantly in the medieval period would put a St. Stephen's church next to the old city walls after the city had expanded out. So there's, interesting parallels with the first martyr as well.
Is some controversy, and it's, as is typical of the mimetics of l'Intonat. That is not how you pronounce that in French. I'm sorry. Maybe in Quebecois. But the conflation with Lupercalia is actually fairly dismissed by most academics now. That it's a lovely idea, but the idea of romantic love doesn't seem to be traced any earlier than the 14th century. And is your people's invention, and by extension, sort of he's not a guncle because he's not a gay uncle, but Chaucer is there's familial dead tied from me to Chaucer, but that Chaucer's time period was, and his writings themselves also trace Valentine to love in this way.
Yeah. So I as I said, I ended up taking a bit of a deep dive on that. There's a poem which is apparently 699 lines, called The Parliament of Fowls, which is about birds courting and choosing their mates, and also being sometimes denied the mate they wanted, interestingly. So I found the English professor Theodore Linebaugh, who says it is generally accepted that the date of February 14th first became associated with romantic love and various celebrations of love itself within the literary circle of Geoffrey Chaucer. And he says the poem explores ideas about nature and natural conduct as opposed to the artificial codes of conduct adopted by those who consider love something that can be ruled and regulated. So we have this idea of the rules of engagement versus the actual sort of feeling. And then again, this very much encapsulates the ideas of emotionology that I'm really interested in, which is the term that Peter and Carol Stearns come up with in the 70s, 80s for looking at partly like history of emotions, but looking at how different cultures and peoples across time and space have constructed, socially constructed the appropriate or inappropriate expressions of an emotion, and also by extension, the kind of experience of the emotion. And Leibau says that sometimes those codes of conduct can lead to disaster. He says, think of any kind of unrequited love. And Parliament of Fowls seems to focus more on the joys and miracles associated with love. And so the other person I found was an article by Madeline Pace. She says that Parliament of Fowls not only exemplifies an idealized version of love in the Middle Ages, but she also claims it represents women's increasing power over their own love lives. And she cites this example that in the poem, there's a female eagle who refuses to choose from among her suitors and asks Mother Nature to give her another year to decide. And Mother Nature honors her wish and consoles the suitors, saying, a year is not too long to endure. So there is also this sense of both like choice and agency, as opposed to, like the arranged marriages of many courtly things, and also just like the economic imperative of it very often for a variety of classes of people. And Pace also says though the Parliament of Fowls is written 600 years ago, she says this still resonates today, and takes as an example the poem's opening lines, which are, so short our lives, so hard the lessons, so difficult the tests, so sudden the final victory, so tenuous the hope of joy that so easily evaporates into fear. This is what I mean by love. And so beginning with the bad and then coming in through those struggles into celebrating and valuing this thing that is so meaningful and also so important to return to and to work through things, right? I quote all the time, but I just recently read the book that it's actually from Ursula Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven, which is a lovely little book about what happens if your dreams retroactively change reality. But the line from it is that love doesn't sit there like a stone; it has to be made over and over again like bread. And I really like that.
I do think it's worth mentioning or at least musing on the Lupercalic association, because we talked about this, I think, in the Cannabis episode as well, that there's so much of our desire when we are researching something might be to have the clear lineage of descent, ascent, the genealogy of thought, of customs and things like this. And the truth is that it's always messy, and that many things that we think, it's an oft accused trope at this point, or oft used trope of accusation, that the church stole this from the pagans and, we need to steal it back. It's not that simple. It's rarely that simple. It might be sometimes, but Lupercalia, for instance, was celebrated. We have evidence concurrently by Christians for 200 years past when Valentine was around. And there's no abolishment of it. The Christians at some point themselves, who were possibly already celebrating Valentine's Day, just stopped celebrating Lupercalia, maybe because of moving away from Rome, and the feast is so associated with Rome itself. And these days in mid-February, where you're honoring the wolf, and there used to be documents, books about how there was this deity that was, Luperca, and it's like, or it's just Lupa the wolf, and that's the mother who raised the founders of Rome. So it also has to do with just purging, and this idea of getting rid of things, and which, when you start to look cross-culturally across Europe, the idea of purging things during carnival season is incredibly important, because you're cleaning out what's left of your stores. You're trying to make sure that your stores aren't the pantry gods aren't sitting there covered with rat shit after a long winter. Like, there's a lot of things for the spring cleaning and the pre-spring cleaning that allows you to continue on in health, because you don't want to sit there stagnant in your own crap. So this idea, then, I think of, like, yes, there is this association with the Lycian Pan, and as things move forward, and this giant mid-February kind of like orgiastic expression of like the zoomies, because you've been, the winter is almost done.
Right.
The groundhog is getting a little randy, and perhaps that's not what it needs to be. There's a lot of options there, but it's also really, we can tell for myself, I would like to be clear of what my agenda is, if I'm going to erase the possibility that things aren't as simple as I would like them to be. And the reason I connect that to cannabis is because I think you brought this up on the cannabis episode of the idea of the candles themselves are very Roman Catholic, trade good. Let's even just call it that.
Yeah.
The idea of light itself is one thing, but the idea of Candlemas being an ancient holiday, bears and badgers and groundhogs aside, yes, seeing the light of the sun is one thing, but saying that the badger or the bear or the groundhog was holding candles is a whole other thing. So, the idea of bleached and unbleached and tallow for, what is an acceptable source of light? If you're in the catacombs, it becomes one thing. Things that we take for granted now of like, the medieval conceptions of Jesus looking a certain way because of, the gay lovers of certain painters being projected, or the patrons of certain painters being, now cast as Jesus in their roles. Yes, but like Jesus's iconography changed hugely during the Dark Ages and went from a very young, androgynous, like sun-centered, like Apollonian type figure to the child once we started bringing Mary back by the 900s and back. And I say back, you see that I'm already programmed for it. Like we don't know. And it's kind of great to revel in that unknowing, perhaps, because, it's that quote that I can remember that, and I'll paraphrase in many ways, but the altar of truth that no one sure exists, that historians serve that God, and that we who are looking at customs and folklore and the occult, which is by its nature something that is hard to know, esoterica, Erica, I don't even know her. I'm tired, but it's all this time travel. So okay, Valentine and this sending of love notes and asking for trinkets is interestingly like ex voto related to me. Like it's not exactly. It's not like you're saying like please send me back lips, but I guess there are some candies that are like that. But I mean, Valentine's Day is extremely associated with like sweet tarts and like little phrases on them, and I don't know. There's something interesting there, and I'm still fascinated by the pairing of Valentine's Day with Ash Wednesday, and this, getting the cross of ash upon your head and being told that like you are dust and unto dust you will return. That this is the start of the like preparation, and if you're converting to Catholicism, like this is the breath before the plunge. Like just get through Lent and all of its fasts and its catechism, because on the darkest day of the year, not winter solstice, but like spiritually the darkest of, meaning when Jesus is no longer on earth, that it's Holy Saturday, that's when you will convert. And the first mass you'll celebrate is when Jesus resurrects. And like, that's such a beautiful, regardless of how one might feel with just looking at that, is like, remove all the names of it. It's like, it's beautifully designed. And to start Ash Wednesday in 2018, which is of course the year we are in right now. There's something interesting with that of the search. It brings up the concepts of soulmates, which we know is a dangerous concept or a problematic concept at that.
Flames.
It's like, how many soulmates, how many souls, how many mates, and of all the souls in the world, your soulmate just happens to be born 2 blocks from you, in a village that you'll never leave the boundaries of.
Right. And how wonderful to win that lottery, right?
Yeah, exactly. Turtle has the ring around its neck there.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well about like the parallels with like the remember that you are dust and to dust you shall return is literally the like an Adamic dictum, right? It's based on the words spoken to, original power couple Adam and Eve after the fall out of Eden. And, beyond reminding worshippers of their sinfulness and mortality, the idea of like, what do you do with your partner to better oneself and to be a helpmate for a partner as well?
I think about the Golgothite imagery that we use even in our artwork and our using of the schematic cross, the grand schema of the cross that's put on your head. Like then you go down the central axis and it leads to the bones of Adam, of Golgotha being built over the bones of Adam in Christian myth. And I use myth both ways there.
A kind of grand do-over, right? Like Jesus identified as a second expression of Adam in climbing.
So with Saint Valentine, it is relevant to the necromancer in all of us, in that Saint Valentine's remains are, because they're permanently on public display, or at least the relics that were in the I want to say 1800s were given to Spain in Madrid. So you can go see them at all times. They are permanently on display in an effort to help all people in need be able to pray to a saint for miracles. So it becomes a very generous saint. And in addition to like, yes, the, birdie, love romances of two birds make a little heart on their chest, and, or the heart is an arrow is just the female genitalia being pierced by the male genitalia. There's still something to that now, even so, the saint is used to provide miracle when someone else has no other thing to go to, and pairs wonderfully in a way with like how we might treat in future episodes. I'm getting a vision of us talking about, how the witch is the last resort, and like what is it to be a saint of last resort, or the saint that you can go to for anything. And so there is something moving about going to Valentine. I'm sure that many people that go to these relics are praying for love, because we can even have jumps ahead of flashes of that, of like, if we're going to talk love magic, this is one of the cornerstones of magical impulse, is to pray for a love, or to specifically name someone as the target of who should love you.
Right.
And this is, we're going to take a dark turn now, because I know it is discussed, but it is still not discussed enough of how perhaps dark love magic truly is, right? When we just examine it on surface level of slavitude, of robbing someone of their will and saying this person will love this person, and that memories here of the craft, and can't squeeze toothpaste back into a tube, and like, what is it like to ask for someone's affections that they can't now take back, and that's not what you wanted, and it gets very harried very quickly.
And it's dark partly from exactly this like subjugation, which is one of the like key components of many kinds of love magic, of this abnegation of someone else's will, let alone a lot of the actual like gestural or like somatic components, if you want to put it like that, of violation, penetration, or infection, of these kinds of not just contagion next to you, but like entering you in some way, or entering your home in some way. It's dark in those terms, but also in terms of how it's like, for want of a better term, like a perversion of a desire to be loved. A lot of the time, right? The wounded blood of unrequited affection, and not to extend too much sympathy to an incel impulse or something like that, but the idea that something as potentially ennobling as love it can be transmuted to this like violent effect or impulse or playing out. Yeah, you see a bunch of ways that plays out in the love magics that I've encountered and studied, and occasionally tried to undo for clients asking for counter magic. The common components of it are either heat, and the idea of like the flames of love, which both can warm through the cold and the dark, and also scorch and burn and immolate, as well as like melting, and a lot of the wax effigies that are melted over a fire, or wax hearts, or things like that. The other sides you do see are sweetening. You do see some versions of that.
Pink magic, or like, not that that's a universal term, but it's lightened, right? It's not, I'm going to sweeten this person. I'm not asking for you to be bad, but like whatever's there, that it be sweetened.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that very often is about sweetening the path between people, increasing friendship and favor, as opposed to a full-on, they shall do my will and nothing else until they do. There are, while the vast majority of love magic is pretty horrible, magically, a form of magical sexual assault very often. There are some sweet forms. There are some forms that, are more like, exactly, like lighting a beacon for the right lover to find you.
Well, I think there's, so I'll go to Spanish here for terms, because you will often see things paired in a trio here of rituales, hechizos, and amarres, like amarres. So, rituals for love, okay, fine, that could be anything. Hechizos, sorceries to make love happen. That doesn't mean the same thing as amarre. And amarres it gets translated as bindings, but it's not, it literally means tethering. And I think this has an assumption that in love magic, that it is easy, and keep in mind that, let's say, historically, we're going to look at witchcraft as the or these magic spells, always in the folk magic that is accused of being witchcraft in other circles, either way, but that it is from the point of view of the women seeking love is most commonly how it's these phrases, right? It's rarely the man seeking the knowledge of who his lover is going to be. The men are associated with worldly power and how to rise in prestige. And the only thing women ever ask about is love. And of course, we know that this isn't true, but there are certain social contexts that help make these things more true than not many times. And unfortunately, that's so, without going into like permanently sex things there, but the idea that it might be easy to make someone fall for you and even sleep with you, but to keep them is a much more difficult thing. Right. That you could get someone drunk and they would then, and you see the thing of like, what is that? Was that one grimoire that says like, if you want a woman to be infatuated with you, like feed her cheese.
Yes. She can be fascinated by a piece of cheese. Yes.
And that makes it, okay, feed her fancy things that, and a cheese is addicting and it gives some of us a little bit of, intestinal distress, but that's its own thing. But the idea then that if amarre is the thing to tether the person, amarre itself is the post, the little T-post on a dock that you whip the rope around to keep while you're away. So the name of the type of spell that would then say, I bind you to me that you may not think of anybody but me, where we get the like, the difference between, sometimes there's a famous spell through Santa Elena, who as the discoverer of the cross, the true cross, the relic of the true cross, then also has the 3 nails. And so we might say by a nail of 1, I name this person and I want them to be bound to me. By nail of 2, I nail their heart to me so that the wound caused by my love for them, that only the blood from their wound will we cancel each other out. And like number 3, this the famous thing, like, may he not have rest nor satiate his hunger or satiate his thirst until he is with me. So this type of spell occurs many times through many patrons, most notably in Latin America through the Santa Elena model of the mother of Constantine, which is a Marian parallel, because Constantine conquers and there's all these things of like, well, like a very successful family. But amarres themselves are often viewed as inherently dark, because this is unchristian, but you could ask for love. You could ask that you find a way to better your own position whereby you're more desirable by people. And so I think it's also one of the things that we might do with many things, but especially with things that we are so personal to us as our concepts of love, is to Mandela affect them throughout history and talk about love as a universal emotion, which I think it's worth pointing out that anthropologically, it is not stated as a universal emotion. There are cultures where there's no concept of what we would say as love in popular Western parlance, especially in English. And I love the right there. I'm gonna give that example. I love the complexities of people trying to figure out what the fuck we mean when we say, I love hot dogs, but then I love my partner and I love my dog. And in any language of like the difference between amar in Spanish of to love, which then sounds like amarme, right? Which is what it still implies a binding, versus querer, to want, to desire, which can be like, do you look at your dog and say, I want you? Sounds a little bit weird. But it's just because in English we can say, I want you is to imply sexual desire. So it's just, there's so much tied up to that of like how much the pinnacle of courtly love of Romeo and Juliet. Oh, like you met each other in 24 hours, you're dead. Like it's 3 days. You have 3 days together. Like what the fuck do you know?
We started like Romeo and Juliet, but then it ended in tragedy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The specific example that I think is interesting from English cunning of like this concept of binding that offers a slightly different context to, gosh, how terrible to exert your will over someone else or to limit their options, which is love leashes, as they get called. There are many cunning folk, both men and women, I've found in records. And a love leash is mostly about stopping an adulterous partner from wandering. And sometimes that has some impotent stuff in it, like he literally can't get it up for anyone else. And sometimes it's a stop him physically wandering too far. You see them being sold to sailors' wives sometimes. And again, tied to knot magic and things like that, with Kate. And so there are specific contexts where like someone who's assigned female is going to have a very, very different experience of love and what their agency is in various ways that's limited to domestic spheres. And so this kind of take on reminding someone of what they are promised, right? The importance of wedding rings in a lot of this practice, right? This is already something you said you agreed to, right? Which is I think of the difference in compelling and commanding, right? Like in African American hoodoo and conjure and Southern conjure, that like the difference between making someone do something that they wouldn't normally do versus like keeping them to a promise, right? Is very interesting to me.
It brings up are you familiar the border ballad? I think it's border ballad, but the blacksmith, where the singer, the female singer, is talking about how a blacksmith courted me 9 months and better. He fairly won my heart. Wrote me a letter, and it suddenly there's news traveling around town. I'm trying to summarize rather than just quote the whole song. It's also strange to quote things I usually sing, but that she hears news that her love is now married, and suddenly the song switches to like first person of like, you promised me the world basically, and you said you'd be true. And he's like, if I promised this to you, it was only to try you and bring your witness, and then even God can't come against you. But since you have no witness, tough shit. And basically she's like, God's going to reward you well for slighting me. But like that idea of like, even when a promise is given, you can't trust it. Mm-hmm. Like part of that is like the lack of the ability, like lack of virtue in the word. And it reminds me then tangentially of like Quakers don't take oaths, right? Because, to give your oath means that your word can't be trusted at any other time. Why is it that when your hand is on this book, or you're touching a tree, should I believe you anymore? Like that makes no sense. And I kind of love the nobility of that, but it's also unfortunately in the world, like it's a naivety thing, because like you might say within a certain group, you can trust that, okay, we are raised to just speak truth to each other, but out in the world, like that's just how it works. And apologies to my Quaker dad for contradicting them. But Quakerism and Spiritism is a whole other thing to explore sometimes. The not side of things, I also, and my bringing up of Spanish things is not that it's unique in any way, just the exemplars are things that I think about of how, okay, amar is to love, amarre is the ship place where like you make the ship love the dock. And then amarres are love spells. Similarly, esposo is spouse, but esposos are handcuffs. Plural of spouse is handcuffs. And similarly, then perhaps the reverse is true, is really what it is, that one handcuff is a spouse. That together you are handcuffs.
So, you want each.
Yeah. Because esposo, this is mi esposo. This is my husband, versus like, these are mis esposos. This is my handcuffs. These are my handcuffs. So I wonder, like, at the end of a Spanish marriage ceremony, is it going to be like, I now pronounce you esposos? It's like, you're bound, the whole concept of being bound to someone.
Into a cost-benefit analysis, which I think I have a feeling we might even talk about a little bit later when we get to Amicio.
Yes, absolutely.
Heartache and things. But yeah, the cutting off.
All the heartache we had to go through to know what we want. which is also, we might say, looking at the little losses along the way, even though we're not ready for that phrase yet.
That's interesting. It's an interesting phrase. We should come back to that.
I should put that in my hat. So speaking of little losses, in preparing the artwork for this, often Al sends me sigils that he's particularly fond of demons. And if you look in our artwork, especially as we wink, wink, nudge, nudge, plan to evolve in the future, but coming back from the future, we've already done of like just adding more things into the artwork. The demon sigils fairly early on featured in a lot of what we did, if I remember correctly. And I asked you for one for Brulafort, and you turned up empty. I'm so sad. Why is this, Al?
I was like, I'd love one too. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not one. I'm a particular one I'm familiar with. Which would, to jump, into talking about manuscripts that detail the offices or office. It's a very short entry for the demon of this episode, Brulafort or Bruzlifer, sometimes. This is a spirit that is found in in two of the later manuscripts of things that the set of manuscripts or the genre that will eventually be called the Grimorium Verum. And Brulafort is a spirit amongst one of the first amongst 8 spirits that seem to be added. There are around 15 manuscripts of this kind of family, if we want to put it like that mention mostly this consistent dramatis persona, this rogues gallery of spirits and their hierarchies. And in the last two of these, the Alabec and manuscript W983. There are 8 more spirits added under the kind of sub-deputies Hale and Sergalath in the Glivia Salomonis de Secretis that will eventually be called the Grimorium Verum. And so we have these 8 spirits added into the last 2 manuscripts, I think, in chronological sequence. We don't see them before, so they seem newer. And none of these 8 have shall we say, traditional sigils attached to them. So yeah, we're missing, which raises some interesting questions about, if a sigil is how you call the spirit, how do you get in touch with them, or indeed in order to get one. So again, it's this idea of the sigil can be a number to call to make contact, but it can also be the product or one of the consequences, shall we say, of contact and of working with the spirits. And crucially, because they're given these 2, I find that interesting that they're given 2 superiors, Hale and Sergalath. And so we have this, who do have sigils, they're far older. And so we have the idea we have 2 seniors from whom we can summon a Brulifer forth and then potentially get a sigil for. So the reason, I think one of the reasons that I proposed Brulifer was that their office, which is incredibly brief, all of those 8 have incredibly just one line basically, is that it said that Brulifer causes a person to be loved by women. And there's a couple of things I find interesting about even that brief office, which is partly that it's plural, right? It's women, it's not a woman. The love of a woman is a common phrase there. And the second thing that's interesting is does this mean that Brulifer rules making one be loved specifically by women, or does it cover other genders as well? There are a variety of spirits called goetic that their office specifies can make a man love a woman, or a woman love a man, or a man love a man, or a woman love a woman. And so I'm interested in that idea of like loved by many. And so we have this idea of potentially talking about charm and glamour in general, as well as I want that one.
Yeah. The corresponding issue is Pemba. It's fairly complex, strange issue. Not as common for people to claim that that's their. You don't see as many temples that are bringing down Eshu Pemba a lot. He's used a lot of workings for sure, and certainly as one who is named for the other world, which is really where his name comes from, and then conversely, or not conversely, but additionally, the chalk that is used in Umbanda, Kimbanda, across Brazilian Afro portions is called Pemba, which is, at its heart is kaolin clay, but then has any number of maybe dozens or thousands of ingredients added to it as certain things to compress into a chalk that you draw with. So the mystery of sacred chalk and what would be called chavatinga, or the dust that you would strew around that are also there is a great importance upon Pemba and its ability to consecrate the space, even in its purest kaolin form. The salutations, especially in those Teiros of Umbanda, they come from a very Angola perspective, or the Candomblé Angola, Candomblé Caboclo temples and the Kimbandas and other spirit cults derived from those that have songs to Pemba as part of the opening, and Pemba is scattered around, and everybody takes Pemba, and your hands and face might be covered with Pemba, and it's used to purify and to make sacred and to bring things back to a certain spiritual vibration, much in the way that sacred lustral waters might be used, or fumigations. I say fumigations all the time, and I know that's like poisoning things, but it's still somehow easier for me to say than subfumigation. I don't know why. It
can be. I think Lagrave distinguishes fumigation from subfumigation, and I'll definitely need to check that I'm right. But one of them is for heating what's cold and is more like an actual like incensing, and the other is more like putting Vicks in hot water and putting a towel over your head and huffing it, and it's for adding moisture to something that's overly dry.
For me, I just noticed this. I just forget the word subfumigation exists. And I was always fascinated by walking by buildings that were covered with circus tents for like 4 days when I was little. So, yeah, right. Why are we doing that?
Like, I go in.
Yeah. So Pemba as an issue, as and I think it's a wonderful thing when the issues have names that are this complex or this reference this many things. because the written account will often emphasize one aspect of that thing. And some will say that there are authors that will muse about how Pemba is our sacred connection to the other world, Kupemba, which the world of living is Kunseke. And the Pemba is very much about an ancestral connection. There are others that are like, no, it is really about the chalk and the fact that the chalk is used to invoke spirits, to hook them, to draw things to you, to provide the body of the field of working for things that are, what is one of the most common things someone might come to the devil to ask for. And by this extension, we can get into a later discussion about Eshu the Orisha is not what is being worked with in the Kimbanda that we are talking about. There are versions of Kimbanda where that is true and the things are conflated. However, I am speaking from, my experience, my training and my lineage is that Eshu really what we're talking about is just means Mr. and Bombajira means miss, and they have their origins in certain understandings of crossroads spirits, cachisos, charmed spirits that are associated with the crossroads deities from multiple traditions. And as each is used to many houses, every house has a lineage, and some houses' lineages are more Yoruba, some houses are more Jeje, some houses are more Angola, some houses are more Congo, some houses are more perhaps Kabbalistic in the sense that they might emphasize more European things and be more on the lines of like, higher, quote unquote, higher Umbanda or Batuki or all these different things. Anyway, what I'm saying is that Eshu here as the witchy dead, the mighty dead of the male persuasion, and that who would come to the devil to seek a partner throughout world history, as we're talking about, would be women coming to seek the love or to snare a specific person or to say, I'm pregnant by this man, make him come back and legitimize me, which is a common working across the board, where this foreigner came in, like the blacksmith song from earlier, this sailor came and, now I'm pregnant and like, I need to make sure that he comes back and honors what he's supposed to do. So this idea that Pemba himself, who is associated with all of the types of signs that we might draw, one of the things that happens, we don't just have sigils for specific spirits. We have sigils for specific spirits to then work certain things. So this, the sigils, which would have many names, but in Portuguese are most commonly referred to as pontos riscados, scratched points or drawn points, in contrast to pontos cantados, which are the sun points. You need both. But pontos riscados are going to be used, and you might have one, yes, for, let's say, Maria Padilla. But then you might have one that's for Maria Padilla to attract a lover to you. One that's for Maria Padilla to dominate everyone around you. Right? So these are specific sigils. And I don't mean to not use the Portuguese there, but I'm trying to consider our audience as English speaking, that these sigils are designed not only to be invoking certain spirits by which offerings can be given, who then might mitigate things, but then also create a field of working where you will be told, I need you to bring 7 yards of red fabric, 7 bottles of champagne, 3 black roosters, 4 black hens, 7 razor blades, 7 knives, 7 packs of cards, 7 boxes of matches with 7 matches in them, the underwear of the man that you've slept with that you want to come back to you, and we'll handle everything else in the temple. And they would make offerings, and they do it, and they might take it to a street corner, and they do this big thing. Well, the point that they draw in the temple might be one that they're calling the spirit into all those offerings, and she might come down, and that spirit, Maria Padilla in this instance, or let's say Eshu Pemba is invoked. Eshu Pemba, like you would go to a temple, and this prescription will be given. He says, come back next week, and we'll do this. You bring all your things the next week, and the priest goes, oh, let's call him. And they draw the punto and they invoke him, or he comes down and draws the punto, because it can happen both ways, depending on lineage or preference. But that spirit then is now empowered with all those objects and walks to the crossroad with you and sets it up and draws a different punto riscado, a different sigil that is now specifically to make that man that you want, whose chonies are now, this Mexican underwear is now in your food offering and everything there. That punto is now designed for that working, or is one that is known to have been effective in the past for a working. Right. So I think that it's important for Pemba as a concept to consider how specific it can get. That not only is it invoking, but the hooking can be of spirits, of whos, but also whats and whys and hows. And these other concepts that can be hooked in this way.
Right. You're not just calling a different Maria Padilla, and for there are many, right? You're calling her with particular tools, if you like, with a particular set of a particular set of skills.
I would even go so far as to say that because we are made in the image of God and our ability to create, that the mere act of drawing the point empowers the spirit to do things that it otherwise will not. You are showing the map of how that spirit is supposed to interact with the universe. And if someone knows how these worlds are developed, sometimes the spirit just draws it and you're like, I don't know what the hell that says. Just duplicate it, take it down, we'll do it later. Some of the older ones, you can definitely tell what's being moved from right to left, up to down. And these spiritual quadrants have meaning within the Congolese or Angola concept of how the universe works.
It's not just a name. It's a battle plan.
It's a battle plan. It's a map. It's a football field of strategy, all of which are then associated with that spirit. And one might argue that the specific sigils of spirits might even reveal what they might naturally be good at if they aren't just your primary spirit, that's your ally or personal, as we might say. But Pemba himself is very, very much likes bringing people together that shouldn't be together. So like if you have a far-fetched lover, this person is way above your station, or like a completely, like just in another continent, like Pemba is an issue that you can go to for that. But he's also someone who loves to give people VDs, venereal diseases, as punishment for when you don't serve him correctly, or perhaps as like, I'll bring your lover to you, but he's not going to be like you like him. He's going to be suffering from late stage syphilis.
Sometimes the dog is held by a monkey paw.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true, I think, of many deals with Eshu. When you're desperate, people don't listen to all the little print. They don't look at all the little print in the contract of it, especially of an oral contract, which, if the ministering priests are doing their job, they can explain what those what the costs might be. But, it's much difficult. He's not dangerous himself, but he does like to be told specifically what it is that you're looking for. And so he doesn't do well with ambiguity. Most Eshus don't. But Pemba being friendly, we think sometimes he might understand, read between the lines a little bit. No, that's not a good idea in the courts of Kimbanda in general. There are recipes in many books, old and new, for making Pemba under him or ink under his guidance. Those are done on certain days, have certain plants going in them, certain animals. Again, Kimbanda is a blood sacrificing tradition. So there's, there might be 14 different animal parts or, 31 different rare things in the Pemba that you're drawing with. And you can make a Pemba for war, love, to invoke, to banish. And then we might crumble some of that, like it's put into a chalk form constantly so you can draw with it. But we also might crumble it and put that as like dust over the door to build a wall of protection type of thing. It's a common ingredient, not only in the asentamientos, but in mixing into a pade, that you might draw a ponto of protection with Pemba on a piece of cloth that then gets laid down the bottom of a terracotta dish, that you put food in there. But then you might also sprinkle it with Pemba of protection at the top and Pemba of love, or like if they on a broad concept, they might just do colored Pemba of like, this specific recipe calls for brown Pemba, purple Pemba, blue Pemba, and white Pemba. I didn't realize it was going to be a girl gargoyle, boy gargoyle. So there's the whole act of reducing things by fire in this way to make white ash, the calcined ash that's left over, that then is mixed with kale and clay and held together with certain herbal waters that are then, also strained and formed into chalk. If you're handed chalk in a temple, you don't know what went into it. It might just be chalk. In the very act of marking is important there. I'm reminded of the prayers to Oshala, to Obatala, of, to let my good character shine upon my skin like chalk upon my flesh. And of course, they're speaking, from a Black perspective. So to have white chalk in contrast to dark skin, that your character is that obvious, that, which is, there are also poems about how it's similarly, if those are the prayers people have heard, that those of a lighter skin tone might be more deceptive by nature. But there's a lot that goes on. Eshu Pemba is generally considered pretty easygoing. Again, just spell things out, both physically and to create the contract you're designing very, very purposefully.
Right. And ensure that it is worth the Pemba it's printed in.
Yeah. And then because, once you sign something, then it goes over to Capa Preta's like, now he's got you. So Pemba is interesting.
Right.
Yeah. The oath. And then gives everybody kind of handing off And those are lovely, giant metaphysical concepts. And those of us that are nerdy, and like to think about experiences, that's important to understand how they fit into our daily lives and how we might cement those associations. But at the heart of it too, is that Pemba is the easiest part of the contract because you're helping create it. And the minute it's created, you are now held under a different level of amat, of binding, right? So it's be careful what ships you're tethering yourself to.
Ships in the night. Yeah.
I think as far as that tethering side to which, not to keep that concept going so much, but I think one of the hallmarks of the devil card in the Rider-Waite, in addition to having this, if you're of any juvenile mind, there's naked people on the card. That one, they have tails, right? And so the woman, I always think about it. The woman has the great tail, and the man has the flame, but it looks like an oak leaf too. But the chains around their neck are not collars, nor are they tight. They have voluntarily bound themselves to the pedestal, the devil, here very much echoing Levi-esque Baphomet figure of hand up, hand down. It's crouched, so seated, but also winged, and goat, but human torso. There's lots of things here, but that as far as, up to 15 here or 15th Trump, we're dealing with voluntary bondage. And it reminds me of there's a lovely deck put out by the same people that did the Pagan Otherworld Tarot that looks at union archetypes. And their card for demon is a hand with chains, holding the hands up to a jar of water pouring on them. It's not going to make your chains go away. The demon is something that might be wasting your time, or that you're not quite understanding what the qualities of your bondage are. There's something really lovely in that image, and I think it's a natural successor to the devil card.
I'm really interested in this idea that they're fetters that we might wear, if not necessarily willingly, but that we don't have to, right? That there is a way out. They aren't cut off from all their options. This is something that they are either consciously choosing or unconsciously not choosing to walk away from.
And right, so we're dealing with Capricorn and Saturn here on the classic descriptions, and this is there's this lovely agricultural side of this too, of the tilling of the earth and digging into the earth that's kind of here at this card in an interesting way. So what are we involving ourselves? Where are our labors going in vain? How much material thing are we diving into? Are we overemphasizing material? We have our world, but are we trying to make another by digging and find more? And by that account too, I think of the chains around the neck, kink metaphors aside, what are we ignoring in our own lives that might not be what's best for us? So the devil as a source then of illumination by showing you what you don't like, or as one example of it there, because I think there's something interesting. Yes, the Averse pentagram is associated with a specific thing at the time of the creation of this deck, and specifically by the Golden Dawn are the ones that are heavy promulgators of this idea, right? Of the man reversed, the microcosm reversed, and therefore there's some attention here of matter over mind.
Right, the four elements are dominating spirit. Because the spirit is underneath now, not on top. Yeah.
So that then brings in the devil as the material center of the universe that we talk about. Our own tropes of this is the Diablo-centric universe model.
Yeah. If God is or is just past the premium mobile out there, as we go through the onion layer back to Earth through the various planetary spheres. And sometimes fixed stars as well, right out there, that we come to Earth, and then in the center of the Earth is Old Scratch.
I think it's interesting because we mentioned it earlier, we have to be careful about ascribing how things find their unique progeny in the world, or genealogies in the world that we don't want to necessarily state the genealogy is for sure. Much like until the advent of DNA, who the fuck knows who our ancestors truly are. But the idea here also worth mentioning that the devil, we know perhaps more than most things the church has done, the church designed conceptions of the devil to play on conceptions of pagan deities like the like Pan and others, which, the war between the Catholic Church and Pan is biblical. It's gospel, literally.
Right.
Pan. So this idea here that the goat cry of Tragoidos and the horny rituals of the Baphomet are all contained within like what we might bind ourselves to. And I also think about the danger of lesser of two evils, but also the benefit of knowing I can endure this because there is something else that I am focused on. So that if you don't get lost in the sauce of self-torture, that you can be like, I can sit next to this horrible burping person for 8 hours on this bus trip because I have a destination that I'm getting off at. That, hell is other people without knowing how long they're going to be there, Sartre, right? So like, if there's no exit, then we're fucked. It's the same thing of like people on the subway platform looking forward to see, is the next subway even coming? That doesn't make it come any faster, but it sure makes us feel better. And so I think there's the idea, sometimes we might have to chain ourselves to a devil. But the idea of like, how much can we get away with? What is the necessary thing? Or are we the devil people are chaining themselves to?
Who are you in this card? Yeah.
If you don't know who the devil is. And similarly, right, because the reverse associations can include things like not just blindness to your situation, but just like tit for tat wars, like just petty bullshit that like is so. The devil is definitely one of like, if the devil is not Rex Mundi, then why the fuck is the world the way it is? Like, if gossip, intrigue, backstabbing, all these things are just part of how the world seems to work. Intrigue rules the world, and like we can harness it. It also comes into like fame and infamy are both fame. I'm trying to translate the Spanish in my head. I'm sorry. I
don't want to be infamous. I just want to be famous.
Yeah. In giving up these little things, allowing ourselves to have losses, because it's like where we branch on from here, the little ones along the way. Speaking of which, I think the only things we haven't covered, and I think we easily can, and I can segue into one of them, I guess, which is if we're going to chain ourselves to the devil voluntarily for a time, or any number of devils, that might be what it is. You're going to chain yourself to a strict rigor of study as at a graduate school. So there's a benefit, but like, what can you weather the 5? You don't know if you can weather the 5 years yet. If 50%, as someone who's wanting to go back, 50% of relationships don't weather PhD programs. It's a thing, and rightly so, because it requires so much focus. And I would put it that it requires an adamantine focus in order to survive that devil and not let the devil steal your soul in that way. And as far as adamantine focus, as far as Vajra-like focus to the term as well, that the diamond itself that is formed under pressure yields its own reward. What's interesting about the freaking diamond, which is our stone of the day, right? I didn't make that up. Is it essentially worth something? Because there's that whole problem with it. It's just like, just buy all the diamonds and now we'll create a world industry where we get to control what the price of diamonds are. Because that part is fascinating to me too. Like, it's a semi-precious, whatever stone. It costs a certain amount, but does it cost that much, or have we but that's all we have to deal with? Like the whole blood diamonds factor, the whole Rothschild factor gets a little bit much, but I still like the symbolism of the diamond, right? Okay.
Just brief aside before getting into diamonds. The wonderful radio sketch my dad showed me when I was back visiting. Which is two guys in a pub, and one of them is some kind of financial broker, works in like Wall Street or something, and his mate is in the pub being like, what is it you do exactly? And he's like, well, I deal in stocks and futures, and gives like, not a very technical answer, but an answer that like, unless you've got an economics degree, you're not going to understand. And he's like, what does that mean though? And he's like, well, let me give you an example. He ends up like talking about, imagine you were an alchemist and you could make you learned how to make gold, but then you realized if you made all the gold, you would, you'd devalue it. So what would you do? Maybe you'd get your alchemist mates together and you'd all agree to keep the secret and to only make a certain amount of gold, and maybe even decide to change what you call yourselves to something that was, sounded very complicated. And it's this ongoing, like, hinting that, like, all the alchemists became financiers, and that they're just there, like, making a certain amount of gold in a way that no one is quite clear on, except that it seems very technical, and they seem to be doing something that no one's quite clear on. I'll try and dig it out. So diamonds, right? Referred to as adamas, from the Greek, the indomitable one. And what's interesting in two counts in terms of slingshotting off the devil card here is the two of the most interesting things about its indomitability. Firstly, that it will not be heated by fire, right? So all of those notions of like making someone hot under the collar, or making someone, or inspiring a burning rage, the diamond can weather that, right? It's also, it can walk through hell and not be melted, not be scorched. The other interesting thing I read is that one of the exceptions to that, because of course there must be an exception, right? It's indomitable, except, right, the little built-in self-destruct mechanism is that it said that its hardness is diminished if it's soaked in goat's blood and smashed, right? Like you got to do both. They specify, like, you can't just soak it in goat's blood. You then have to give it a good smashing.
And here I'm just going to offer that maybe goat's blood is a blind for Coca-Cola.
Which will eat through metal faster than anything else, right?
Yeah, except aluminum, apparently.
Oh, the cans.
Because it's right. Okay, so the adamantine quality of diamond and this nature of like how much obviously the fascination with how much we mine or how much we're mining to get these things, which is a horrific act of violence, right? Mining itself is just a very violent act, and in addition to it, the number of deaths associated with this substance, much like those of us that carry mobile phones, there's precious substances in there that have human life associated with them.
Yeah.
And that toll is huge. It's similarly like, it used to be like you could look at someone with a diamond ring and be like, well, that's just horrible. That you would, like, all of us with cell phones have the same crime with certain rare metals that are used and from similar parts of the world, interestingly. So that pressure that's there, that history up there. The link to the Vajra, which is often translated metaphorically as adamantine or diamond-like, is truly the Vajra is hammer in some force, and is the word that's also used for thunderbolt, for lightning bolt, in a Proto-Indo-European sense that we see the hammer of Ukko, who is the Thor-like equivalent in Finnish mythology, has the Vasra, and so Vajra in Persian, Vajra in Sanskrit, or Vasra in Finnish, which supposedly in more further west you go, when Indo-European starts changes its shape a little bit, but Veg or Weg becomes to be a similar sound of gaining power. It's always associated with power. It's always associated with the hammer strike, with the thing that can't be destroyed. And this, even when it becomes syllabatized and other things, this notion of the Vajra as a literal warhammer or thunderbolt of the king of the gods, whether it's Indra, who's king of the devas in heaven, or whether you're talking about the Vajra, but then in Vajrayana, right? So you have the Mahayana there, there's as a vehicle, these things, that Vajrayana becomes this idea that you, using Buddhist principles, that you can attain enlightenment in this lifetime, not just that you're trying for lifetimes to escape, but you can attain enlightenment instantly and indestructibly in this lifetime, like a lightning flash. So Vajrayana, but that Vajra itself, I like this concept of indestructibility, and I like the this very even more tangent here of how Tibetans ended up, they pronounce it as benzo, which is just regionalisms of how things move through time and space, that Sanskrit gets pronounced differently as it moves across a mountain range, and the indestructibility. And we were just talking about this, about the myth, and there's a couple different versions of it, but with the monk who is mispronouncing things, and another monk who comes to check him out and says, well, his powers are there, but you're mispronouncing things. And when push comes to shove and the magic needs to happen, the correct pronunciation isn't what does it. It's the man's years of practice and discipline, and that which is indestructible, which is not language itself, that allows him to use his mispronounced mantra to accomplish miracles. And so that there's something to that about the indestructibility of reality and truth that is sought within certain paths and even avoided within others, right? Like, so if we tie ourselves to that, well, perhaps we're avoiding the truth, perhaps, but if we can hold on to something that can unchain us at a future date? Is it a bit like going into the Matrix one more time? Is it a bit like incarnating one more time? Is it, what is the game? Just one more round of cards at the casino before going home. It's one last time, one last night, one night only. All those things come to mind with something like the diamond, which is also the birthstone. So gifts will be accepted.
Tribute is allowed. Yes. It's interesting, that notion of like the diamond as like the clarity of truth, or like the truth that cannot be tarnished or corrupted or bedeviled. It's said to pull gold to it magnetically. And I think about like the panacea of gold, of like the universal incorruptible medicine. But it's also said to be antipathetic in some accounts to magnets and magnetic things, which I also find interesting. So it refuses the pull of other things. And yet in yet other accounts, they're said to be, you can pair them again, like lodestones. And there are like, they're often mentioned together, whether it's like antipathetic or is similar, like growing off magnets or lodestones sometimes. But you can get a pair of them that are gendered a male and a female diamond. And it's said that if you put those in a box and feed them with the dew of heaven, especially of the dews of the month of May, interestingly, that you can grow them. And so we're back to this concept of like, not just the single diamond hammering away at the lies, attempting to fetter truth, that's coupling endeavor, again, to be good helpmates.
I'm very curious too, I think with diamond, because of it looks like a perfected version of quartz in many ways. And the imprisonment of spirits in stone, in crystals, or scrying at least crystals for spirits. But there is a notion very strongly, obviously, of imprisoning spirits in crystals. And that this notion of like this ring, it's one of the most common things you see sold as magical goods around the world, is like, this ring contains a jinn, this ring contains an alush, this ring contains a demon, that it's trapped in the crystal, or at least that's its home. And then I think about this with like, we talked when people go to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, as an example, that there's many objects there that might be like ritual objects that were taken from their place, or doors with curses on them, like, do not ever remove this, or a curse be upon you type of thing. And that's its own thing. And sometimes like there are people that are very sensitive that go in and like, I don't want to play the like, what does it really feel like or not? But like, I think there might be some truth for people that are like, this is a little overwhelming for like, I need to spread this out because you're being bombarded from a lot of energy. Even if it's just the triangulation of eyes upon the object that give it its power, that's a whole other side of it. But I think about things like the Hope Diamond and seeing it in person and being like, I don't know if I should be looking at this too long, because there's so much there's so much to it that it's like, do I look at, do I do like a Perseus thing, like look at its reflection? Is it, but I want to be around it. What's the point of coming in person to see it? It's like, you want to see it. And then it brings up the whole concept of performance itself, sorry, flash forward in time. I got a performance studies degree in 2020. And then, we'll flash back to where we are now in 2018. But the idea that performance invokes temporality right away, right? So there's something in time is performed. Whereas a picture it can perform things, but it itself is not a performance. And so the notion of going to see something live, what is the point, especially now in internet culture, where we can zoom in on a Van Gogh painting to like see every imperfection, but we still might want to see it live. And we have a certain like exchange of breath with these inanimate objects that like we acknowledge an animacy to. We project an animacy, a notoriety, something that is perhaps indestructible or perhaps destructible in the opposite way, that we're creating something that is built upon the temporality, the time, space, location of it. And what is it like to be in the same room with the Hope Diamond, or in the same room with the cursed door of Hatshepsut, or in the same room with the child divination figure in the African section of the Met that I love so much. Why I look at the picture and like, yes, my brain starts moving, but it's very different than being just on the other side of the glass from it. And is this all projection? I don't know. I mean, no more than Plato's cave, right? But like,
I was going to say, this brings to mind, like you're not just thinking about the diamond, but the light through it, and the light that you are capable and allows you to see it. And that's where you are breathing with it and engaging in its aura which is, I think, a term that a lot of art historians actually end up using, right?
Yes. So I like that it stirs all those things. And I think similarly, not that we can't go back, but as far as like our agenda of time travel today, that the color of the Hope Diamond immediately brings to mind our plant for me, which is Heartsease, which is it's a at best a very short-lived perennial, and more commonly an annual. And it's a very common wildflower, but it's pansy. It's a wild pansy. And I love the British folk names for this plant are
they're amazing.
Joy.
Yeah,
like
absolutely amazing.
Johnny Jump Up, Heartsease, Heart's Delight, Jack Jump Up and Kiss Me. Jack Kiss My Ass, I found out as well. Jack Kiss My Cheeks, Come and Cuddle Me, Come Inside Me, I found reference to. Three Faces in a Hood, Come Inside My House, Come Sit By Me, Love and Idleness, which is Shakespearean. Pink of My John, wow. Tickle My Fancy. Like there's a lot of sexuality associated with this pansy, which then the pansy itself is its own insult, usually towards effeminate men. Or men who will not play the sports or go to war, which might be considered effeminate, but it's a very specific thing of like, don't be a pansy.
Right. And the term comes from the French, apparently, like pensée, one of the words for thoughts. And so this idea of one who thinks rather than acts. Hamlet. Right. As well as not performing their masculinity in a way that, is deemed acceptable by that too. Yeah. Cupid's delight, sometimes. So like the whole idea of the where bolt of Cupid fell, right?
Which is quoted in Midsummer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Oberon is describing the flower that he wants Puck to go get. Yeah. The very, very sexual stuff. A lot of like calling, right? Meet me in the entry. Piss her in the buttery. That's another one of the ones that I like.
Wow.
Yeah, it has AAs than a member of the Wu-Tang. Yeah. Godfathers and godmothers, it's also called apparently, sometimes, as well as constancy. Yeah. So there's this delight.
Is godfathers and godmothers doing, I mean, is there any other hint around what that might be? Because that's often a term for gentry, well, what we call gentry, so fairy, as well. Like not even just the concept of fictive kinship through, the thing that will support me if I die, my children will be taken care of, but also the guardians of the land, perhaps. That's probably projection on my part, but the colors of it are also just really beautiful. Like as far as like that Hope Diamond kind of violet, bluish, purplish that often has the bright yellow as well. I did learn, or at least relearn, because I didn't recall. I also learned how to use the word recall correctly because of the lawyer boyfriend. So but that however it's pronounced, but I'm going to say peduncle or peduncle. Peduncle is the stem of the pansy because it's a long stem that has a singular inflorescence on top of it, or a solitary flower. So it's just a really long stem that holds one bunch of little flower. So peduncle, but like it also, it looks like a neologism of many things, but
Yeah. It's a great word to say.
In difference from some other members of its family of the genus, it does not have leaf rosette at the base. It doesn't have that crown on the earth, which is fascinating to me because then we go into mythological ascriptions to herbs and things like that. And those that have a basal rosette are often can help you gain your station back, or are nutritive, or are helpful to man by their nature. Whereas those that don't have a basal rosette, they're low to the ground. It's like, this is an accident. Something happened here. So you get violet tricolor being this associated with love and this like dart-like thing. Whereas violet, is hairy violets do have a basal rosette. And it's just the simple differences in how a plant grows and things like that, and how those mythic associations can be got with it.
It's not either or, and it's not an either or in terms of morphology versus mythology, right? One can support the other in various ways. How the leopard got its spots and so on.
Yes, it is fairly common European plant. It does really well in shit soil, and helps transform shit soil. So the silty soils, clay soils, acidic, neutral, whatever it is, like wastelands, vacant lots, grasslands. It just seems to do well. It doesn't do quite as well in, let's say, forests, where it wants bright light. It wants, which I find interesting, because then if Puck is sent out on a search for it, it wouldn't grow where everything else is. It would grow in a clearing of the forest, which is always associated with this kind of respite, oasis, place of visions, place of religious, vision as well, and things like that. So there's a grove, that there's the grove is as much associated with the clearing in the grove as it is the grove itself, and that nature's temple type of thing. If I remember correctly, it's skin stuff, and eczema. I don't know if it's been successfully ever used for psoriasis, but it is one of the herbs used for it. But definitely eczema and a lot of other skin eruptions. And then anything respiratory, as minor respiratory, because this doesn't seem to have a very strong affect, but it was paired with like colt's foot, and a few others. So the violet family in general has medicine flowing through its family.
That's fascinating. Huh. Yeah. So like the outer, and I would say like get you a herb that can do both, because most of the, it'd be called heart's ease, right?
Yeah.
Is mostly about the core of us, not just in terms of like our secrets, that which we hold close to the heart, but it's used in all sorts of medicines and heart healings of various sorts of the diseases of the heart, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. As we talked about, it's a love herb in general. It's all of those like calling or meet me or enter me. Like it's used for drawing new love. It's used to increase a current lover's passions or to hold a current lover closer. But I also find it especially interesting that it eases the broken heart. That's mostly how I end up using it and prescribe and recommending that clients may wish to look at its historical uses in those contexts. Nicholas Culpeper kind of actuallys, rather than calling it Venusian, that it's actually Saturnine, and so is said to assuage the pain of love's sorrows, especially a broken heart. And I'm familiar with at least one kind of folk working from the British Isles where you are said to, if you have a broken heart, you can go out with a handful of heartsease and a handful of borage, which is pronounced to rhyme with courage a lot of the time. Borage is for courage, and you dig a pit. You make a depression, and you put a fire in that pit. You bring heat to the dark, and you burn it in handfuls, and by extension, I guess, kind of fumigate. So fumigate yourself, but that you burn away the bad, and then and usually it's that the heartsease goes in first and the borage goes in second. That you not only heal what's broken, but you bolster more of the courage to love again and again. Courage, like the that which is of the core, right? The core, the heart again.
That's beautiful. I had a herbalism teacher who used a tincture of it. Actually, I think it was probably more. I want to say it was sticky, so it may have been a syrup. But she had her father's purple heart on it, and she felt, and I love the romanticism of it, that although it's just said that the purple is because it represents courage and bravery, that it is she likes therefore the illusion or the way we can link things the way we do, of that, to call it purple heart or to understand it as heart's ease could be a way to acknowledge that the heart after battle needs healing, and that it takes courage to love again. It takes courage to love the world again. It takes courage to have courage again. Yeah. And so that the purple of the purple heart, for her, she used heart's ease in her PTSD herbal formularies for soldiers and for anybody who had a severe trauma, especially. And she also had a certain good use of it, using it as, although this is not necessarily, I don't know how it aligns or if it's in the flower, the traditional 36 Bach flower remedies, but, flower remedies themselves have an old habit of someone putting flower petals in water and kind of doing this is more of an energetic thing. But the idea of sprays and things that are, aren't going, don't go putting it just anything in a spray and spraying it on your animals, but that it was also good for easing transitions for pets that had lost their owner or things like that, that certain amounts of Purple Heart, as she called it. And that's not a recommendation to go do it because I don't know the toxicity levels or anything like that, but I leave it to it that when we're talking about flower essences, there's very little phytochemistry in a flower essence. It's petals at sunrise or sun or noon or moonlight or however, various different forms of making flower essences. And it is, that's not homeopathic, but it's in the same school as homeopathy. It's just not a standard homeopathic thing, but it's often in the same breath as homeopathy.
The people I've spoken to that are into flower essence stuff often talk about it as a parallel or as a kind of expression of story magic as well, or story medicine, that you are using it to help tell a new story in some way.
Yes.
To draw on the example of the plant, and as well as its actual medicine, some of its teachings, if you like, its example, its life story, and how that can affect your life story.
So I don't think I don't want to misrepresent her and say that she's using it, but I have always been fascinated by the Purple Heart that she kept on it and her personal strong association with it. And so I mention it here.
Beautiful, yeah.
It's interesting with that, with the idea that it takes courage to love again, this kind of love uncrossing or love healing that has to happen for even a soldier to enter the world, but that we all fight our own battles, and that the loves we've lost are preparing us for something else, right? The idea that the heart can break open, not just break apart, not just break, but it can break open to something that allows it to grow again. And the pansy itself being an annual primarily, or very weakly perennial, that it must die and allow its seed to be the hope that its seed will just grow again the next year. It's not a big, strong, mighty oak. And I think that there is, if you catch what I'm putting down here, that there is perhaps an understanding of loss here that is important to understanding healing, and that the little losses along the way are important for the fuller picture. That we can't ignore those things. That Valentine, for all of the if we're going to follow a model of half of us being torn apart from another half of us, and that we're searching for that one half, or what is it to know that there might be many halves that can fit, and that all of those things can enrich our lives. That sometimes some people will have great romantic loves, but also it's their friendships that strive them through life, and other people, they find almost everything they need in one person and that works for them. But to compare ourselves to others is futile, right? We are each different people. We are each under different circumstances. And that what guides us through it has to be something different. That diamond, the light that guides through, or what it is we choose to make our summoning chop tough, I guess, by metaphor. But I do like this idea now that it found a segue of the things we lose do allow us not only to appreciate what we have. I don't think we have to lose to learn to appreciate what we have. I think I would hope that we don't have to lose everything to show appreciation and gratitude. I think gratitude is an amazing practice to cultivate. And studies show it increases happiness. It increases just a general outlook on life. So gratitude is a practice which can then take us into understanding that we can be grateful for the experiences we have, even when they're bad. If we spin it, it does not mean that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes random shit happens, but we might be able to find remedy in how to heal ourselves by acknowledging our losses, not running from them. So the little losses along the way, as it were.
So I really like the idea of the little losses along the way. If I'm picking up what you're putting down. The idea of almost re-navigating slightly, the idea of the navigation computer that's like constantly echolocating itself, making tiny adjustments and course corrections and that kind of thing, because we want, on the whole, loss, if it's going to serve us well, to be small losses, right? We want to shave the block of wood into what we want. We're not like making big cuts and hoping that it's the right shape. We'd rather do it in several and get it right. that notion of craftsmanship of what is lost. And it also makes me think of the wise decisions of cost benefit analysis, if that's what it's called, of when you decide something, you lose. When I make an appointment at 12 at midday on a Wednesday, I have amputated. I guess amputated isn't quite the right word. It would imply a body, but I have gotten rid of. I have lost the opportunity to do other things at that time.
I mean, I feel it's fairly appropriate in our magical world that we're going to anthropomorphize everything to even compare it to our narcissistic centered views. So I think amputation is wonderful metaphor there.
Well, there is a court configuration that I call amputation, which is when you have Carca as a first witness and it moves to Amicio, and it's one of the Fortuna Major judges, but in that case, it's one of those like not so much the greater fortune as this is the best we could do with a bad situation. It's the least dark timeline, and it's when restriction turns to loss, right? Which can be directed at the potentially gangrenous limb, but is also like when you've not just imprisoned or circled or restricted or put into isolated something, but that isolation itself turns to loss, right? The last will and testament also feels kind of that configuration as well. That you're potentially locking down the finish line, maybe that you're, it's a great configuration for editing for the last final edit. Like, look, is it going to make the talk? Is it going to make the book? Is it going to make the presentation for the meeting, or is it not? It's when you have to be like the ruthlessness of wielding the knife. Likewise, to flip that around, Amicio first as a first witness and Carca as a second is also Fortuna Major. And I think about that, it's a mildly favorable configuration. It said except in terms of news and communications. So I like the idea of that the leak is sealed, Amicio moving to Carca, right? There's this loss, but then there's a constriction or a fortification or a limitation imposed. The leak is sealed, but the secret is out, right? The cat is still out of the bag. It's a basically okay configuration where outgoings have been locked down, but also that which you lose before prison time, right? And again, it's that notion of like, I know we're talking about Amicio, but like the idea when Carca turns up in lawsuits, it very often can actually connote like the reality of prison time.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up in the sense of, again, if we're comparing everything to geomantic, then going into Odu, of Carca is Odi, and Oshe and Odi have an intrinsic relationship as far as, especially within Dilagun, the way we read it, because of the relationship of Oshe to Oshun and Odi to Yamaya. So when you have Oshe moving into Odi or Odi moving into Oshe, there is automatically a connection between these two water spirits.
The twin was flowing.
Yes, and those are the twin water signs, and it speaks heavily of the Orisha Inle as well, who is found in that combination of signs. And given all those stories, it spurred an interesting thought of, because you talked about amputation, then I wonder, okay, so what's the decapitation court configuration? And can you plot 4 mother figures based on a saint's life and summarize them as left and right witness and a judge? So that was an interesting, like, okay, because, projects, Al.
I wonder about decapitation. Maybe the dragon's head moving to Carca, or I mean, it depends what is meant by the amputation. Is it
the dragon's head moving to Rubius?
Yeah, I was going to say Rubius, right? Like the actual act of like the violent like death and bleeding out. Is a lot more Rubius, and even the idea of like the I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a sunny side Scorpio, but even the idea of the glossolalia of the severed head of John the Baptist feels a little bit Rubius-esque as well. Like the depending on what you mean, what the glossolalia means, but the idea of like spouting a bunch of emotive, in theory, nonsense or prophecy,
like the poison that that can't quite be metabolized or antibodied.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, it's funny that can kind of come up in as far as the devil card then.
Yeah,
Not specific phrasing of it, right? Of there is no attenuation of the virus. You live with it. And in this, the devil and certainly the Rider-Waite symbolism of the voluntary chains, that the chains can come off, is such a huge thing.
Right.
We do see very specifically these kind of color-coded tails that they have. Just the difference in how they're each drawn, but it's comparison to the lovers still. So I don't know. The devil is a card. Oh, as far as the deal with the devil, it might even pair up with the Missio well.
Right. What we lose and what we choose to lose, and what we lose willingly and what we give up willingly. Yeah, sure. And that again feels very Rubius to me as well in dealing with certain unclean spirits, as they get called, and using geomancy as a way of affirming or confirming, I should say, a spirit communication. Rubius can sometimes, I found it can sometimes connote the need of an offering of some kind, pouring out a bottle of red wine somewhere or breaking something expensive. And that obviously has that dimension of loss, as well as the kind of, it's not just the act of breaking eggs, but the willful, like the third egg into the sixth egg into the dozen eggs that you have, that you're like dashing into something when you've like really got into it and you've really kind of like started to lose yourself in the emotion of really enjoying the rage or the outpouring or the smashing. I think of that the Dada exhibition that gave people hammers that had to be like shut down by the police because like these genteel art lovers were kind of overtaken by this spirit of finally being able to act out in this space where they were meant to be very careful and inward and receptive, being suddenly given license to be outward and externalizing and violent. And I don't mean that in a kind of like see the seething underbelly of hatred and rage in the human experience, so much as just like if you give people hammers, like say, especially in a place that isn't normally where you're not normally allowed to speak loudly, let alone break things, then a certain degree of pushing against that is going to be found.
Mm-hmm. I've had the discussion before of that exact Dada art exhibition of art exploration in comparison to the slippery slope of sarcasm, irony, and things like that. That mob mentality goes to a very lowest common denominator in communication. So the larger a group is and someone smartly starts to do something that might be a double use of language, it then gets interpreted in a different way. Which is, we see this all the time on our favorite Liber AF. Just in the sense that there is a lot of study in the social cues of communication, right? Being as important as the spoken word, and this exploration, especially in the last 2 decades, into autism spectrum disorder, and looking at communication and the lack of ability to process emotional and social cues from spoken communication, even especially when in person. But that happens, of course, on Facebook. So everybody adds their own emotion in, or is unable to perceive emotion in a group, and therefore adds whole levels of craziness. I mean, and if I'm going to be honest, what's a devil that we chain ourselves to willingly more than Zuckerberg's, Liber AF Landia. But I find that interesting too. Of a tool is, especially a specialized tool, is a profound thing. But if you don't know how to use it and don't know the parameters of when to put it down or when to, I guess this ties into Lent too, right? of like knowing when to walk away from something is interesting. And even the tool, this tool is no longer is no longer being used for its purpose. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or, what is the progression of the use of any of these things, I suppose?
Yeah, this kind of makes me think of, so trying to work out when Amissio's loss is good and when it's bad in different houses. And it's even more confusing than just like when it's in this house versus when it's in that house, because, you know, many of the houses can connote, have delineations that people make effort to try and find connections to, but that have specific contextual applications, right? So the one I'm thinking of is Emissio in the 7th, right? Supposedly when it's specifically with regard to a current beau, can suggest an adulterous wife, the loss of fidelity. But in the case of, and specifically not just the loss of fidelity, but also of the phrase used in the 4th book is contrarying her husband. So I guess it's also the loss again of that social structure that we talked about in terms of like that sense of the literal patriarchal kind of the social structure of the household. But yet when it's referring, because the other thing that like the 7th connotes, and the one that's a bit trickier or that's more interesting is not just like business partners, because, you know, then people like partnerships of any sort, like close relationships of any sort, but rivals, right? Known enemies is also 7th, right? In which case Emissio connotes that contentions are to be ended, right? It's the loss of that enemy. So I guess you could still frame it as like whoever it is that the 7th refers to is in some way lost to you. But the difference between losing the fidelity of a relationship and a partner now arguing with you and removing the stability of a household versus ending the very thing that you are doing with them, I guess is the through line there. But when is loss useful, right? When is it what we choose to put down, and when is it something that is taken from us?
Well, it's a matter of perspective shift there, right? I mean, if two things that come up are as far as other topics, because I'm always trying to figure out how they link in, but the use of Heartsease in Midsummer Night's Dream to Love Lies Bleeding to assuage the love affair of Titania Oberon and the foil of Bottom in that way.
And that love makes asses of us.
Love makes asses of us. It is used as a way to remedy the situation of Titania not loving her Oberon, and bringing him back, or bringing her back to his affections, which there's a lot of interesting things in that. Heartsease, probably come back to in a second. The other side of it, just I find it interesting with the sacrifices. When do these losses become productive? Well, when you're a witch, and especially when you're a classical witch at that, the famous, especially in the canon of most world literature, the scary power of that creature that bleeds and does not die, that the bitterness of a woman who is in her quote unquote natural state in the Western canon, a life giver, the one who produces new life, or at least incubates it. I wanted to put the disclaimer of the repeating of historical perspectives and cross-cultural phenomena is not necessarily the opinions of either of the good doctor or the goat. But as far as looking at that and seeing the relationship to the loss of blood every month and the power that is gained when they are not bleeding necessarily, according to many world mythologies, that how can they bleed and not die? And then what's happening when a woman is not bleeding, and why is she more powerful? And what happens when she no longer gives any of her blood up? She becomes a crone, and that is true power. You are no longer female or male. You are other. And
that's very interesting humorally, because I mean the second point there is just briefly that like there is a natural tendency towards melancholy and old age of everyone, and that's part of the worry is that the primary point is that menstruation is actually often seen as a natural phlebotomy. Now this is either taken to mean that women are better in theory at preserving health, or that they are naturally sicker and more prone to extremes of emotion and inconstancy, and thus their bodies are naturally attempting to have to do this extra thing in order for them to supposedly function. But there are one or two proto-gynecological tracks that include stuff on not just reproduction, but also menstruation, on fertility and temporary barrenness. Jennifer Evans, Aphrodisiacs, Fertility in Medicine, has done brilliant work on this. That highlight that actually, yes, some doctors were kind of edging towards this position of saying, like, it's kind of healthy that someone would void their ill humors naturally and not require the artifice of sharp instruments, which is an interesting parallel to the idea of the barrenness of the witch and the inversions of motherhood that are present, certainly with like the witch mark being the point at which a familiar suckles blood rather than milk, and those kinds of points.
Witch tit is Fantastroid Genzart. Can't remember which one. She didn't put it in the last list. Anyway.
Oh, cool. One of the Emissio houses, I'm not going to go through more, but one of the ones that particularly interested me was, especially in light of, for me, Emissio is related to Taurus, and I came up training after my initial experiments in all sorts of things, and then getting really into chaos magic, getting really into running through Hermetic Kabbalah. And so there's always this kind of air of like reading that as I was learning tarot, and still associating the zodiac with its its major arcana being and Taurus being the Hierophant. And so looking to how Emissio plays out in the 9th house, it is said to be a figure that connotes inconstancy in religion. So it isn't necessarily, so the easy option is that it's about loss of, like, losing one's religion, of losing faith. But I think it's interesting that it's not inconstancy. It is not referred to as loss of faith. It's referred to as inconstancy. And so the idea of what makes good faith is not how often you lose it or gain it, but how often what is lost is the consistent path. It's the sense of, if we're going with that Hierophant thing, is the connection to tradition.
There is the discussion on this as to the head of the church itself being female, right? The bride of Christ, and the changing of the popes being the different suitors that are coming in and impregnating the church with new life each time. Sometimes you have a bad father, sometimes you have a good one. But that it was a blessing that there was no constant immortal ruler, and that it was not sacrosanct, unchanging, which is interesting, because when you come to one of the other main monotheistic religions, when you come to Islam, you're taking Muhammad as the seal of the prophet, and there's a lot less room for divine revelation after that point. And there are different interpretations by different leaders, and thus you get the different divisions within Islam. But this is based on interpretations still of hadith and the interpretations of what the prophet said and who he said it to, as opposed to the Pope, which can he can go to bed one night and say that he had a dream from God and act on it, and this now be the Immaculate Conception, and rewrite church history, or Benedict's erasure of purgatory, or whatever it is. And so you have to be like, wait, I'm sorry, what just happened?
Infallibility.
Which was created by Pope. Funny that.
That feels like an interesting thing in terms of if we're going to talk Cersei or Kirky, then Kirky feels like it's I'm being cutesy in German. Kirken, the church. Her magic is so rooted in drugs, right? In drugging, and in not just like knowing the secrets of plants, but not just being a pharmaco, whatever the suffix would be, but being a polypharmaca, like a many druggist of some kind, a multi-druggist. and that notion of the difference between what is lost between the racing mind and the clumsy tongue.
I find Kirke, Cersei, it's always going to be this double pronunciation because we most commonly call her Cersei, but she is Kirke. I find the relationship to one, the children of the sun, the royal blood of the sun being in their veins, and Cersei being very prominently listed as the daughter of Helios, along with Medea. And so you have this pairing of witches that are it's the sun's blood in their vein, which is interesting too because they're also considered the daughters of Hecate in some versions. But as far as an epithet, Hekatos, the one who shoots from afar, is an epithet for Helios as well. So and the hints that Hecate was originally a solar deity also becomes an interesting thing, or at least includes the sun.
Right.
And, this changes because of the Greek adoption of her into the pantheon and things like this. And she becomes associated with other things as syncretism happens. But and her confusion with Calypso as well is very, I find, as someone who is so fascinated by herbalism and the poisoning of the greening of the heart, let's say. There's a thin line, of course. If one can cure, two can kill, and this constant balance and need for what is the right dosage, what part of ourselves is the dosage for this conversation. How do we maintain our energy? How does a plant maintain its energy? How do you prioritize? These are things I've always associated with Cersei. Whereas the other side of it is Cersei always. To my young little young magician heart, especially early teenage, of like the Medea and Cersei aspect of Medea is like over the top, right? She's got the Clytemnestra streak of just like, when you piss me off, everything goes to hell. Whereas Cersei is definitely steeped in like the plant thing of, oh no, I've plotted this out and I have everything on the shelf. Whereas Medea's like, oh, I need to do this now. Bring me a lamb and dig a pit.
And I'm going to eat my kids about it.
Yeah. And, I have my own associations and stuff, but I've always loved having had many strong herbalists that are ladies and having the privilege of studying herbalism with women primarily. I find Cersei is this wonderful model for them in a very interesting way. That taking power into her own hands and killing her husband makes her own father, who is a god, banish her to the island, and what that means. I don't know. I find her quite interesting, and as far as what becomes her exile to Italy and the Italian lore that comes from that too is always the local variations of a cult figure such as Cersei, who is literary, but becomes so, because of the written nature of Roman culture, becomes just, I don't know, it's like a Lord of the Rings, it's Galadriel-esque. It's fascinating. She not openly acknowledges the goddess.
This idea of her as simulatrix, however you want to say that. The idea of being an enchantress is very interesting. I think I really like Patrick Curry's work on what is enchantment. Like he's gone through this big kind of thing of going from being a historian of like a Marxist historian of astrology and looking at power and how knowledge of nature and the stars is weaponized, to looking at like environment and ecology, and then looking at the history of enchantment as contrasted against the history of magic, where he says magic is about seizing power and the ego again, like we were saying about, that tendency of conjurers towards enchantment as finding oneself lost in a song. And the idea of the enchantment of pharmaca, of finding oneself lost in the soul of a plant, is, I think, particularly interesting.
Especially when you go into plant medicine, as far as songs received and how you interact with the plant. And various shamanic and medicine interpretations of this, that it's
and especially with the idea of her name possibly meaning like the kirku, right? The binding, the encircling, the idea of the asceticism that you get with a lot of like plant shamanism, which we'll use that term. The idea of it's not just an asceticism. It's not just punishing oneself for having taste buds. It's removing hot and stimulating things, to not just like so that when you imbibe the plant or when you're involved with the plant that you aren't distracted by other things, but literally making oneself more plant-like.
Yeah, I think that is the important interpretation to take on, is that, there's the stigma against, the Crowleyan thing of like the sin of restriction. That even as we're going into this Ash Wednesday thing, taking on of Lent, and one of my favorite things in talking with the Brothers of St. Gregory, we did a couple workshops with them, and just the reinterpretation of Lent by many modern priests across the board, whether it's Anglican or Catholic or the high Protestants usually, because that's who celebrates Lent. But the idea that Lent is not about just giving something up, it's about taking something on, that the priority should be about taking something on. And then when you are engaging in La Dieta with plant shamanism, with plant magic, that you are not just, it's not about the restrictions that you're experiencing. You're taking an active role in forging a relationship with a plant. And
you're making more space for them to talk to you and to present you with their song.
Yeah. So it can be viewed as a via negativa, but it can also be viewed as I'm making the plant the priority. So the other things drop off because they don't become a priority. They're not a priority the same way. In the same way that any relationship, that if you decide I need to put a priority on my lover right now, that the decision is very easy when someone's like, can you go out tonight? And you're like, no, actually I have plans. Yeah. It's not, oh no, I can't go out and it's now something that I can never do again. No, the priority is this. And when we talk about personal, goals in magic and our lives, which should be the same, right? That hopefully, I guess escapism is its own goal, but the prioritization of doing what's necessary and following that is, there's something really beautiful there. And again, how it all ties in, I don't know. I just the observation that during Lent, during all of this with the plant, that we are gaining more. That even the eos of Ocha and the things that people freak out about, of like, I can't do this and I can't do this and I can't eat this food and I can't go in this social circumstance and I can't wear this color. It's because you're gaining ashe by doing it. You're making sure that you are garnering the highest amount of personal power to make things happen. So it is like the person who knows that maybe alcohol is not the best for them. And some people are not going to be like, I can't have any of it, but maybe they'll limit themselves and be like, no, it's one drink and that's it. Or it's no drinks. And then people go, oh, I can't believe that you can't do alcohol. Like, it's not that I can't do alcohol. I'm choosing not to because it distracts from my purpose.
Right. And I sap with my potential for greater engagement with the flow of virtue or ashe or forza. By doing so. I was always surprised to learn that. I say always. I was surprised to learn that Cersei was exiled, because it seems like she's got a pretty good setup. And
because she's going to take advantage of whatever her situation is, like a true witch, right? So it builds up of what we said. When are the losses a good thing? When you're a witch, and especially when you're a classical witch, because you are going to save this and use it in your acting later. You are going to make sure that everything that is someone trying to deplete you, you will turn it into a nurture for you, to turn the loss into a strength, and you will spin it on its head the most you can do. That to me reeks of a strong witchcraft, right? Of like, you're going to launch this curse at me. Let's figure out how to volley it and use it so that it at least either benefits me. It's that famous the Facebook humble brag of like, whoever cursed me, keep doing it because I'm doing really well.
Well, the same with like weaponizing any kind of link of the easiest way to, one of the ways, along with burning the thatch of the person you think, of the house of the person that you think has cursed you, is to heat your own urine up. Because if they're working an aggressive witch bottle as opposed to the wider practice defensive witch bottles, then they have cursed you and they've cursed your blood, and the the urine as dross of blood, because everything is a form of either rarefied or gross blood, for a while at least. But that's a way of getting of torturing them back. That someone who has invested the time in trying to hurt you has forged a magical link that again you can make work both ways, and that consistently the reappraisal and reformulation of your vulnerabilities as a strength, as a source of creative void that brings forth new and exciting means to further be in the world rather than be removed from it to gain engagement and power rather than lose it.
The rivalry aspect of Cersei is important too, right? That she is the reason Scylla is the way she is. That it's for the rival love that she turns into a monster and condemns to a lifetime of being a weather monster. And that's fascinating too, that I don't know, she's a pretty badass witch. I mean, there is this thing of like her unbridled power needs to be put on a desert island. She needs to be limited in her scope because she's obviously too damn good with the few resources she does have. And, you know, bringing Odysseus back to life, as well as pulling a Queen Bavmorda and turning them all into pigs. There's just I don't know. I think we've opened up an interesting door here in our discussion of dead magicians when we start including literary figures, because especially in this time period, literary figures are gods. If we want to follow the postmodern trend of there is no difference, especially with both of our backgrounds in chaos, as it were, that it's just as powerful as many things you grew up with. I mean, to call on Gandalf for many people, but before I go down the slippery slope, as a hardcore traditionalist and other things, and that way of to have, especially in magic, so few female figures, and they're always over the top. Because especially, I mean, in the Greco-Roman world of the fear of women and their power, and I find it fascinating also that here we have a name. We have a named witch, not just the witch, not just a story as they are in most folk tales. You know, the witch of this city or the witch of this mountain. We didn't know her name. Right. But when you get into Circe and Medea, you're going into pseudo goddesses that very well might be remnants of older cultural goddess-like figures that are somewhat demonized or somewhat haggified, a hagiography, if you will. But I don't know. I she's one of those figures that for me is, there's so much there. There's so much there as far as a potent force. It's and I'm sure at some point I will vote that we talk about Erichtho, which is just a whole nother like school of witch, like the inspirational like description of Erichtho there. And so Circe's beautiful, right? Circe's intoxicating because to have divine blood always plays into the Greek notion of excellence in physical nature as well. Whereas the Romans have different views of that because of perhaps Etruscan influence and other influences where physical deformity as well was often a sign of another type of magic, which is true in Greece as well. When you have Cyclops and things like this, these more deformed zoomorphs and humanoid figures that are non-standard.
I think there's a really interesting thing around when we accept their mythic status as being a potential doorway to get at, in some sense, those whose names were erased, right? Of who was called like Circe, right? Throughout history. And that sense of her being this is, often as I've kind of intimated or ranted before, it's kind of my approach to saints as well, to an extent. Not the only approach, but like who do they stand in for? Who is named after them? Who is allied with them, as well as that figure themselves? Like who else stands before them when we meditate on their power? Who do we stand with? Who faces in the same direction, looking at this icon of exiled power and strength from binding, from the poison of plants, from the blood poured forth of the sun. You know, the idea of working with more mythic figures who were never physical ancestors can open up whole vistas of ancestry that we couldn't get at otherwise.
Yeah, your Magian to if you're reading this and don't have are not aware of it and have not ordered it or whatever it is, I'll plug Al's book for him through Revelor Press. There is a great examination of the Three Kings that should be explored more fully. And I think one of the standouts from it is I want to say justification, because it is an argument that is difficult for some people to understand, but an examination of the three magi as magician ancestor. And yeah. I think what you're tapping into here and talking about with Circe is a similar thing, that there is, with these mythic figures especially, two things come up. We have the conflation in the West and the authority of the Church of Rome being very built upon the historicity of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And the Western predominant Christian theme being that Jesus was a historical figure that existed at a certain point in time, and the authority of the church comes from this, and therefore apostolic succession is important, and Peter was the first pope, and blah 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 blah. Whereas which is interesting, is because one of the main founders of the Western Christianity, or just not us, but one of the main founders of Christianity being Paul, who never met the historical Jesus. Mm-hmm. There's something to it, having never met the historical Jesus, that he becomes one of the staunch advocates for the domination of Christianity, that there wasn't an emphasis on Jesus being a historical person for him. It was about the Spirit of Christ. Right. And therefore you get the obsession with the crucifixion in Catholicism, because it's a historical event, as opposed to the resurrected Jesus, which is about the Spirit of Christ. So it's an interesting, I'm not saying that that's the reason, I'm saying that this is things that have been talked about and examined already. Yeah. So there is that need in the West to have history be myth and myth be history, myth in the truest sense of being timeless, that the Bible as history becomes something for us, and that we lose the power of conflicting myth, that we have to rectify it in the West, because the Greek notion of, or in modern extant polytheistic religions or Orisha religion, that a conflicting myth does not deny the truth of the other myth. Right. They're both examples of a truth. And so there is a polyvalent approach that is very different from there must be one true way, there must be an actual history, and because there must be one true way. History is there are facts. And if you can form what those facts are, it's that whole, this has served us well, this myth of Christ attitude. That the centralization. Yes. And talking about it, because then you can't have conflicting viewpoints, because it's history. Right. And I'm not arguing. Well, do you know what I mean? Like that's the attitude. We well know that when you're using history as a weapon, you don't want anyone else to pick up a rifle. No. You want to control all those. You want to burn those other gospels to the ground. Yeah. And past that, it makes me think of, following on the Circe thing. There is a trend right now in contemporary magical paganism, because of the exposure through many writers, especially those the wonderful books that have come out of Scarlet Imprint, and exposure from many in the Western speaking world to the ideas of syncretism. And there is a forced syncretism that is happening that should be addressed, because that's not syncretism, that's masking. Syncretism describes an unconscious dominance of one culture over another. So a spiritual value center as, oh God, I'll have to footnote that. But the value center idea that if you live in a fishing village, that you're going to have a fishing god. You might not have a deer hunting god because you live in a fishing village. So the concept of hunt is very different for you. So when the Catholics come in, you're going to have an emphasis of Peter as the fisherman, and you're going to have a large festival around Peter. Or whenever your local catch of fish comes in very prominently, you'll have a saint or a new feast of Peter, and somehow his bones were moved on that day for your people. But that's syncretism, justifying your value centers in the new clothing. So
And value centers are an action of community. They are not someone sat there with a cup of tea and a copy of 777 or whatever new school, like cutting edge translation of some, ancient Greek or equally more hipster, obscure antiquity culture you're attempting to shoehorn into something. Right?
yes.
It arises from need and from action, not from attempting to world a theory.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
Play at the pseudo history of syncretism
Right.
that has happened. Oh well, I have these saints and they represent these gods. That's lovely. Why aren't you just making statues of those gods? I'm confused. I mean, for those of us that grew up in syncretic traditions, I'm going to be a hipster and be like, we thought of it first. No, but there's also the point of there's both a recognition that the saint is the Orisha, but it is also something different. And if we start with that's a whole larger complication of looking at art history and philosophy of image and things like this.
There's also with the research. Please correct me. There's a strong element in many practitioners like Santeras and Santeras of the universality of these things. So
yes,
to say that Saint Barbara is a mask of Shango is not to say that she wasn't touched with some of the potentially at least touched with some of the ashe of that Orisha, but at the very least it doesn't mean that like you have to choose one or the other.
Very much so. I mean, there's also that when you're coming from a fixed perspective, the priority is to emphasize Shango at first, right? So it was a mask by some people of actually literally putting the Orisha inside the saint statue. But there's also the thing of you're looking at someone who's dressed in red, who's a patron of gunpowder, has cannons and swords, and has a giant goblet, and which looks like a mortar. So you have the potential of saying, well, that's obviously a child of Shango. And that's an important distinction also in the art history of it, that as far as Orisha images are concerned, that we're rarely looking at the image of the Orisha. We're looking at a follower, or we're looking at a priest.
Yes.
And so that side of it fits perfectly into saint maskings of, well, what would that saint be a child of? Well, they look like, because they have a predominant color, or there's snakes in the image, or there's a lot of blue, or the story of the saint that's associated with it, or where it was found. So
that feels like a point of reversing that thing around. We can use an image and the effect of Circe. We can know her by her influence on other people who were called Circean, right?
Yeah.
But the other way around, we can get at Circe through who was called her. Like who was said to be like her, who was said to be if we want a child of her, right?
Yes.
That other way of getting at it. So the linking of her and of our dead magicians and of our ancestor magicians isn't just, oh, they were old, so there must have been other dead. It's not even that like she's explicitly linked to the graves of the dead in the necromancia. And the necromanteons, but that you can get at her virtues and powers through her children.
Yeah, there's something there of this extending this without feeling too appropriative of the children of certain value centers. That this is something you align with, and my obsession with her as an herbalist and such a potion maker. Am I a child of Circe? No, but as far as I feel like every herbalist should be looking at evidence of these figures of prominent to understand the scope of it and what the performance of herbalist is even and its function outside of our own time period and certainly with that and the demonization of feminine centered modalities is always interesting, right? So and the struggles there, but that's beyond the scope of this particular thing. And I can also recommend like 40 books on that. But never again the Burning Times. I'll probably edit that out. But I'm not going to edit it out. I'm just going to say that like that's a primary example of the history problem, right? Of holding up the pseudo history of the Burning Times as this thing that we can reference to the torture of a determinate amount of people and the fact that it wasn't flames that weren't used most of the time. But hey, everybody's got to have a punished past, I think, to legitimize them. in their own self-mythology. But what I was thinking about was, look at the creation of the United States, and it's harkening back to being a new Rome, and that you were trying to constantly invoke the empire of old Europe, and, comparing Washington to Cincinnatus, and the city of Cincinnati being named for him. So you're comparing them. That is a syncretism that was chosen, and a very sneaky one, that you're going to model monuments to our presidents off of Greco-Roman temples, and the neoclassic movement in that way, to invoke authority, to invoke what is already prominent in the mind of the public, that represents power structures, that represents value centers that are held in place.
Yeah, well, this is one of Uncle Friedrich Nietzsche's big points about imperialism, is that it is essentially. I mean, we could say necromantic. I think his would be more of a. I think he wouldn't mind if he was, throwing down all his exclamation marks. Taking a very Freudian approach and being like, it's dressing up in granddaddy's clothes and trying to strut around, and he makes that in
what do we call it? Mama healing?
Mommy healing. Yeah. Wearing mommy's heels and strutting around and pretending you're an elder. Yes. Well, it's partly literally pretending you're an elder. Like, look at the powerful empires of the past. Like empire is always a little bit nostalgic for attempting to not claim its direct authority necessarily, but claim its implicit authority. What it
authority has to be given from somewhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, even the direct lineage sense, but the obsession with the past become like the emblems of power of the past in order to articulate new powers into the future is obviously a fascinating thing for those of us interested in responsibly using history, if only as exercises in what not to do.
I think where the Toltecs and the Aztecs are a good example as far as New World things that are erased or at least removed from Western, lens and gaze. There is that the Aztecs saw as a nomadic culture an opportunity to seize local mythos and give themselves the authority of being the new Toltecs, which was a culture so old that all they knew of that there was some mythology perhaps, but there were a lot of really fancy buildings that they could then say, well, this is where the sun was created, and we're going to hybridize all the mythology we come across so that we're constantly in power.
Right.
It was the perfect metastructure to go to build, one of the largest empires, most successful empires in 250 years before it's a collapse. Successful, how do you define that? I mean, I think thousands of hearts being ripped out of chests daily is a successful empire.
He's speaking for his dead.
Yeah, we must okay. But what is to do except not rip the hearts out of it?
I think there's a thing there as well of like seizing actual power, not just potential power, right? And I think that's a distinguishing point between invoking Cersei and invoking Spock. Right. If we're just to distinguish from chaos, if that isn't too much of a reduction, the idea of getting at an actual sense of something historically powerful or that was considered important or dangerous or secret is not just about how it makes you feel. It's about an engagement with something older, and that can be most present in terms of the colonization of the past, the way that what colonizers do with other people's ancestors,
speaking my language,
and that kind of stuff. But also of what are the actual effects beyond your own headcanon, if we want to employ that kind of language.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So many thoughts, but I also know that we might have to save a few of them for a future episode.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot there just in this approach towards mythology of the self, the authority of the conjurer and the sorcerer, and where it comes from, and the cry of the modern, right? That we can't believe things the same way that people 1,000 years ago perhaps did, that hell is not a physical place anymore, unless it's in the bottom of the ocean, which could be a possibility. If we haven't explored enough. Or the planet Venus.
That grant from your man now looking increasingly like Mark Hamill, who also looks like a jaded, in the turn of his career, looking like a jaded Jedi trying to destroy the Jedi while keeping the Jedi going. You look like Slavoj Žižek about this point of we are too jaded, and when the ancients said "I love you," they would mean it, and when we say it, we have to say, as the poet might say, "I love you," and his mockery of that and what nonsense it is that the ancient peoples were more versed, could probably quote more poetry than you or I could, many of them, and that was already implicit in quoting because people knew it. You didn't have to put the subtitle in of what movie they were quoting because people knew it already. It was part of the language and it was cooked into it. And the idea of adding those layers of mediation of, we can't possibly experience in the same way.
Over-explaining the joke kills it.
Right. Exactly.
Really, I mean, you start to go into like Baudrillard territory, right? Of
simulacrum.
Yeah, the simulacrum, and just that beautiful false history of opening a book on the copy of the copy of the copy, and the map is not the territory mentality, and to misattribute the Bible is still one of my favorite things, which I know I've talked about many times, but I used to be a quote that I put up all the time, the fake quote from Ecclesiastes, to start off a book talking about it's referencing authority. And this happens all the time, like Rumi quotes. Rumi quotes are fantastic for that, right? On as memes. They're like half of them have nothing to do with Rumi.
Because he kind of carved a career out of not quite, it's definitely not bumper sticker, but he kind of has a place of being the kind of mystic bumper sticker dude.
Well, especially when like some of the prominent translations for that, and there's like a translator for, I believe, Hafiz, which is a phenomenal poet, but it's one of the more popular translations in English. It is a quote translation. He was poetically inspired by the original work and then reinterpreted it. So there's very little parallel. There's a parallel, but very little veracity or there's something off in the copying of it. It's not just lost in translation. He has recreated the mood of the original poem, which is something that's an art of translation. You can get into that whole discussion on that, but
it's fascinating how many poets like end up getting to about the middle of their careers and are like, I'm going to try and do a translation or a retelling of a classic story and do it my own way, but also that like they've already done the kind of like, this is my own like set of poems or visions or things, whether it's any number of poets. That's what they end up doing, is like going back to something and kind of combining a close actual classicism, if that's what they're looking at, which it usually is, at least in the oeuvres I'm familiar with, and while also combining it with like their own take on that thing, right? And I'm not just talking about what if Maleficent was the main character? I mean, like telling it in their own way with their own emphases. Not trying to put a new spin on an old story, but like trying the best in their way to tell an old story again and show that the story is timeless. Maybe. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I'm really pleased that we've addressed, or we've started to address Circe and this notion of mythic ancestry in a way that feels really fruitful for talking about this. Like I feel very like buzzed off this, for want of a better term.
I think it's a lovely way to enter into Lent, which is a traditional period of just self-examination, re-examination. That taking something on and finding the other things that you don't need, as we head towards the revelations and the parallel mind of what Easter is, of revelation, of insight, of gnosis, of resurrection on the other side. So I find it wonderfully interesting, of the going into the desert, the further temptations that come, and we'll continue to talk about this through our Lenten journey episodes. But I think we should probably end it here for today. But thank you for bearing with us for the experiment of digital podcasting, double digitally. So Skype podcasting, which we are by no means the inventor of, but our technological sluggishness, we are, I don't know, the sweat of our labors kills the slugs of our technology or something, some horrible metaphor.
Well, it's new territory for us, and so even if other listeners, dear listeners, may be utterly familiar with that as a modality, then it's like watching a movie you've seen a bunch of times with someone that's never seen it and has survived into adulthood without having seen whatever it is, which is always hopefully interesting, at least. I've had a blast, and I'm excited to try this more. And it also means that potentially we're able to do this from, as I'm zipping about the place, and as you're zipping about the place, and
to include the elusive friends that we have around the world in these conversations. And I think that's
yes, which is something we've talked about for a while. Is not is wanting to expand these conversations, not just between you and I, and I would listen to you all day, and especially as I learn more and more ways in which I can poke you in useful ways. Not poke, that's the wrong term, but like throw you a thing of like, what do you think about this? And know that I will hear something like new and fascinating. But wanting to expand this two-part circle out into other people. Bringing their perspectives and things is makes it eminently more doable to do it like this.
So the podcast is Circeing its little falcon circle, binding things in.
We're sirening people onto our island.
Yeah. the allure of the Calypso Circe hybrid. Yeah. No, I think it's been some great discussion. Again, just. Lent itself and Ash Wednesday and the reminder of mortality and the dust to which we return it's the fertile earth. It's the refertilization of the earth in many ways by going back. And this is always the hope in these kinds of journeys and separations from what we're doing to reinvigorate ourselves. I saw one of the brothers that I talked about from the Brothers of St. Gregory. His Facebook status today in talking about Lent was how many people were giving up Facebook for Lent. He's like, don't give up Facebook for Lent. Make Facebook a tool of your Lent. Like don't just get rid of the things that are distracting you. Turn them into strengths. Turn them into examinations to go deeper and to be conscious and to treat more things with awareness, as opposed to just retreat into a hermitude where you don't have to deal with the world because you're not a part of the world.
Right, replacing a glut of stimulation with a glut of the lack of stimulation.
Yeah,
that's and not to sound all gold and mean about things, but if constantly avoiding something is still on your mind, it still holds power over you, and maybe that's a useful power that reminds you, to think before you get angry at someone, and is a thing that. You can wear that collar with a sense of knowing that it changed you to something that might, embiggen you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But that hopefully, ideally, we leash our demons, but never defang them.
Mm-hmm. No, don't dehorn them, don't defang them. That
Right.
the bow of Cupid, or the arrow of Cupid with its love and idleness connection, that what is shot out, is it blind, is it one-eyed focus, is it vileness or idleness itself, or what kind of love comes from this, and is the stimulation lasting, and how do you let that, I don't know, last you into the desert and see you out the other side. The desert feel.
That it's both. I mean, with the words of Oberon, it's both a fiery shaft, which is great for saying in a fancy way to try and make people giggle, but also it's quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon. Like, that's the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about its fieriness; it's about its consummation in something as well. And the steamy nature of what it is of that reconciliation of opposites and a variety of other things, that the thirst is real and that the arrow is followed. And
I mean, for all you redheads out there, that is a fantastic pickup line, right? You want to see my fiery shaft. But
I get, yeah.
Literary pickup line at that, because at least that's some credit there. The desert of the real, the desert is real.
Right.
How to turn desert into dessert, as we used to say in CCD. But okay,
in the dessert.
Yeah. Add an S. We don't have to use a metaphor, just add an S. But with that, I wish you a good start to all of our respective Lents, whether you celebrate or conflagrate or mitigate or whatever it is, confiscate, that the seizing of power of what this time is always interesting, just as we're using the saints' days to seize our conversations. I think the repulsion of something, those that hate the idea of Lent are the ones that should do it for sure. And the ones that love the idea of Lent should maybe give up Lent. I enjoy those types of, we do follow a trickster spirit. But with that, may you lose your head in love as much as possible in this lifetime. I think that is always something there. And may we be led by fire and smoke through the desert into a new oasis on the other side. Thank you as always, Al, for the conversation and many things to think about. And I'm so excited that Circe was finally talked about, and opens up a whole new can of lady worms and I mean that in the best way possible. Because I believe we have the possibility of lady worms, lady snakes coming up as a future talk. So
yes.
So
yes, and the blood of Gorgons,
yes,
right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome.
St. Patrick's Day, be damned and be blessed at the same time. All right.
May all your losses be of things that hold you back, except I guess maybe the moderations that you make pacts with to hold you back.
And the meek shall inherit the earth. That appreciate the little things, and our salvation is always with ourselves. So with that, thank you so much, and we shall podcast again very soon. Signing off from Skypelandia and the digital airwaves. Go home.
Farewell. Yeah, parting sweet sorrow.